to the Dailies on April Television International. Today being the 28th of April 2023, the last Friday in the month of April actually. And we'll be going through the papers. A lot of stories are dropping. We still have the fact that there are over 3 million Nigerian students still stranded in, Sudan, and then the evacuation has actually started. A lot of things are happening back and forth coming from the NEC meeting on whether the fuel subsidy will be removed or not. A lot is actually going on during this time, so we'll just indulge you to please just sit tight as we keep you up to date with what's happening on the papers. I have Rachel Tanzi. Good morning.
Good morning, Sally.
Thank you. And I am Sela Elisha Dashon. Please do well to follow us on Facebook and YouTube and drop your comment also, and then later on, as usual, we'll open the phone line so you can actually air your views on stories that are of interest to you. And let us go through the papers. I will be starting with the Friday Leadership newspaper with the big story: no going back on fuel subsidy removal, federal government declares. You can find that on page 4, with the rider says no subsidy beyond June to consult with Tinubu's team. Hasty removal will bring more hardship to Nigerians, coming from marketers and analysts. And I'd like to read a little detail of that story. The National Economic Council on Thursday in Abuja asked the federal government to put the June deadline for petroleum subsidy removal on hold, pending the review of existing plans to provide palliatives for Nigerians. When arguing that the petrol subsidy should be removed now, the council said the federal government will broaden consultation with state governments and other key stakeholders such as the labor union, petrol marketers, Minister of Finance, Nigeria Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, and representative of incoming administration. The expanded committee will determine if the removal will be done by June as planned, it said. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, disclosed this to the State House correspondent shortly after the validatory NEC meeting presided over by the Vice President Yemi Osinbajo at the Council Chambers of Presidential Villa in Abuja. She said there might be a need to send a supplementary budget to the National Assembly if the incoming administration aligned with the decision to extend subsidy removal. According to Ahmed, the Council has, however, agreed that the subsidy must be removed now rather than later, as the nation cannot afford it anymore. She said Council agreed that the timing of the removal of fuel subsidy should not be now, but that we should continue with all of the preparatory works that need to be done, and these preparatory works have to be done in consultation with the states and other key stakeholders, including representatives of the incoming administration. And you can do well to continue to read more detail of that story, because this is something that concerns everybody. So we'll await what the outcome will be from the stakeholders, whether the first subsidy removal will be removed or not. Still on Friday Leadership, Supreme Court allows federal government to appeal against Kanu's release. No missing $2.4 billion crude oil revenue, Madami tells House of Reps. You can follow up that story on page 7. And we have 32 days to hand over Governor's one new revenue sharing formula. You can find that on page 7 as well. 10 killed, several injured in just fuel tanker explosion. You can find more detail of that on page 14. National Assembly Leadership, Tinubu asks APC governors to work with party. And on Sudan, first batch of Nigerian evacuees arrived today. So you can read that on the front page and also on page 7. We have a picture story. You can do well to get the Friday Leadership and read more detail of any story that is of interest to you.
On the Daily Sun newspaper, Supreme Court grants federal government's request to file additional grounds in appeal against Kanu. This is coming from the IPOP adjourns till May 11. The details can be found on page 4. Court refuses to grant request seeking to stop census. The details can be found on page 27. The big story on Daily Sun: Senate presidency race. Tinubu rejects APC NWC push for South-South. The writer following that insists zoning should be to South. APC senators-elect root for Kalu as Northern Southwest coalition pushes for Southeast. Malami dismisses alleged claim about loss of $2.4 billion crude oil sale to China. Governors want Buhari to present new revenue sharing formula to National Assembly before May 29th. Federal government suspends fuel subsidy removal. Governors hail Osibajo in valedictory sessions for him. Don't abandon Buhari after May 29. Adamu APC boss begs Nigerians, urges Nigerians to support Tinubu to success. While Guan Yi worked for my emergence, Imba Enugu governor-elect. Coming from him, you can find the details on page 27. At the downside of the paper, we have 12 burnt beyond recognition in just tanker explosion. The details can be found on page 5. We have a picture story from the left to the right. Former Minister of Power and member Enugu State Transition Committee. At the down from the left to the right, we have Deputy Managing Director Mr. Muyiwa Akinyemi, Group Chairman Mr. Tony Emefla, and Group Managing Director Mr. Oliver Alawuba at the 61st Annual General Meeting of United Bank of Africa in Lagos yesterday. And that's all the news on Daily Sun newspaper.
A New Telegraph newspaper: on a USSD service, banks' debt to telcos rise by 50% to 150 billion naira. You can start that on the story reading on the front page and read more inside, with the writer saying some have started paying. And we still have on the issue of business, CBN Bank's credit to economy hit 70.59 trillion naira in March, with detail found on page 5. Malami to reps $2.4 billion from crude oil sale to China not missing. And on insecurity, we have reviewed our operational strategies coming from the CDS. Adamawa government to prosecute those behind Binani's illegal declaration. You can find that on page 5. Supreme Court okays federal government request to file fresh application to oppose Kanu's release, and you can find that story on page 4. The big story: Sudan crisis. Nigerians stranded in desert as bus driver down tools, with the rider. They said Nigerian government didn't pay them. Says 22-year-old source claim only 10 of the 40 buses arrived yesterday. I don't want to break this bad news to my parents, coming from the trapped student. Evacuation proceeds tedious. Challenges are expected coming from the minister. Says first batch of victims will arrive Nigeria today, and I hope we get to meet them. You can find detail of that story on page 2. A lot of stories coming regarding the Sudan,
yes.
you know. I'm finding it difficult if we're saying that they said Nigerian government didn't pay them, and then we saw in the paper yesterday that $1.2 million was being paid, which if you are going to round it up to our own Nigeria currency, we're talking about 900 million naira being paid. And here we're seeing on the paper they're saying they didn't pay them that. And there were also stories that were coming that they were, you know, getting into the bus according to their state of origin, which is very, very sad at a time like this. This will take us back to, we remember when students were being evacuated from India, they were asked to pay their fare. This is not very far. Just in the 2000s, we had that case, and we're still having the same case over here. Something is not right, and I think something seems fishy here. We are seeing even a trap student saying they do not want, or he or she do not want to break this news to their parents. When the parents are expecting that their wards will be back soon, we are seeing that out of the 40 buses that are supposed to be there, just 10. So a lot of things need to be rectified. If they are stranded at the bush or desert, as it is on the paper here, because drivers down tools, something needs to be done, because they are still not safe in the desert where they are. So I'm hoping that the government will swift into action, because it's really, really not a right time where we see a lot of things seems not to be, matching up. So we hope that the government will do something to rectify this.
Just as Dabiri is saying that it's only normal to have hitches, I do understand this is a war-torn zone, and then everything, there was never a plan for something like this. These are all impromptu decisions and just quick requests being granted and all of that. And then you can see that since yesterday it was being mentioned that Nigerians, we need 40 buses for all of this. However, only 10 have started moving these trapped Nigerians in Sudan so far. It was clearly stated, meaning subsequently the other buses, the rest of the 40 will be available for the students to keep boarding and then coming back. However, the new thing is the most alarming thing is not concerning the buses but being stranded in the desert, because now the drivers are saying they were not being paid completely or enough. Now let's not forget that there are people who take opportunity of such situation to exploit, because we had already seen some of the stranded Nigerians even in the paper saying that they are being exploited at the Ethiopian embassies by the officials there, because they see now these are people desperate to go into safety, and they would want to take advantage of them, because we saw that on the paper where they're being exploited. For those who were able to manage to find their way to Ethiopia, that they were being exploited at the Ethiopian embassy and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if this case is also another example of exploit and people taking advantage of people who are in desperate need of help and saying that they haven't been paid well, whereas we know that they've been paid well. However, in as much as this is an urgent thing and nobody can say this problem or that problem will come up, I just hope that something is being done quickly concerning it. And if it is true that we have students or Nigerians that have been stranded in the desert because of things like this, then something needs to be done quickly about it. It's not going to be easy because nobody actually knows what is going on there as it is, but we just hope that something is being done quickly, and then that the people that have been given this responsibility will also be truthful and honest people to make sure that they take them to safety.
Of course. Well, let's look at other stories still on the New Telegraph. Court refuses to grant alleged terrorist negotiator Tuka Mamu bail. You can find that story on page 3. Afenifere asks Buhari to stop the 2023 census, urges judiciary to conclude polls, petition before May 29. You can find that on page 4. Pengassan calls off strike after NNPCL intervention. And on the first quarter of 2023, value of Nigerians' non-oil export hit $1.345 billion. You can find that on page 5. Next, suspend subsidy removal to form expanded panel. Holds validatory session. Governors to meet Buhari over new revenue formula. Currently, it's federal government 52.68%, 36 states, and then we have 26.72%, and then 774 local government, 20.6%. You can find more of that division on page 2 and 4. And on 2023 polls, Atiku Obi orders victim of overconfidence complacency coming from Buhari. Allegedly got false hope from outside. We equip security to subdue terrorists and bandits. You can find that too on page 3 and 26. And we have a picture story where we can see the governor of Lagos and other stakeholders. So you can grab New Telegraph and read more detailed stories of interest to you.
On Nigerian Tribune, Afenifere false federal government insistence on conducting national census. Court refuses to grant request seeking to stop census. There will be movement restriction during exercise. This is coming from the federal government. National Assembly presiding officers, let's build consensus, Tinubu tells APC governors. The big story, next suspends fuel subsidy removal, hints on supplementary budget tinkering with PIA. Domestic production of petroleum products best option. This is coming from NLC and TUC. You can find the details on page 2. Flood hits Lagos metropolis after downpour. School building houses in Agege, Atimosho at risk. The details can be found on page 26. Allegations on $2.4 billion crude oil theft baseless, lack merit. This is coming from Malami. 10 killed in Plateau tanker explosion. Hoodlums burn FRSC vehicle on rescue mission. Court grants federal government leave to file 9 new grounds against Nnamdi Kanu's release. Down commission to partner foreign investors to link 44 southwest cities by rail. The details can be found on page 2. Still on Sudan crisis, amidst stranded drama, NEMA says first batch of evacuees to arrive Nigeria today. The details can be found on page 26. Governors to meet Buhari over RMAFC's new revenue formula. You can find the details inside the paper, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
On Blueprint newspaper, mixed reaction, 3 federal government decision to back down on fuel subsidy removal. It's a breather for incoming administration coming from Adekulu. As a first step, citizens must know the quantum of fuel consumed. You can find that story on the front page and on page 6. The big story, amid funding security concern, court stop move to postpone 2023 housing and population census, deploying 100 billion naira to exercise wasteful economic offense coming from Afenifere, says citizens disturbed by recent election and security challenges. NPC rails fear insists we have covered 99% of Nigeria. You can find detail of that story on page 6. Naira drops again at black market exchange at 740 naira to a dollar. You can find that on page 23. And on Bridge, APC National Working Committee member drags national chair Adamu to court. You can read more detail of that on page 5. Federal government establishes agro-mineral ISO certified lab. You can find that story inside the paper as well. Opposition victim of overconfidence in 2023 polls coming from Buhari, which you can read on page 13. Cash shortage in first quarter will hamper Nigeria's economy in 2023 coming from Fitch. Expect new and I fell of Oyo before May 29 coming from the Kingmaker. And the last story here, NNPCL signed Memorandum of Understanding to build floating LNG to boost cooking gas utilization. And that's all on Blueprint newspaper.
On Daily Independent, no stolen 48 million barrels of crude oil worth $2.4 billion coming from Malami, says reps probe of allegation unconstitutional sub-judice. Buhari boasts of facility recruitment of 60,000 soldiers and others, says terrorists are being subdued. $744 million block funds, COIs working for foreign carriers quitting Nigeria. Emirates consultant in Exist declares workers redundant. Stakeholders urges ticket sales in dollars to stop job cut. You can start with the details of the big story on the front page and continue inside the papers on page 26. Governors ask Buhari to prevent new revenue sharing formula to National Assembly. Ebonyi commissions 36 billion naira airport offers free flights for 4 weeks. Fresh trouble for Dogua as court asks Kano AG to prepare charges against him and others. Still on the homicide case, you can find the details on page 6. Overconfidence worked against opposition in 2023 elections, says Buhari. Why federal government made U-turn on fuel subsidy removal by June. The details can be found on page 29. FGN Securities save risk-free investment opportunities. This is coming from the DMO, and you can find the details on page 7. And that's all the news on Daily Independent.
On the Nation newspaper, 48 million barrels of crude oil not missing, Malami tells the House of Reps. Southwest State to launch regional power rain project. You can find out on page 27. And Buhari is saying we have done our best to improve security. Want to know what you feel about that by reading more on page 3. UK Prime Minister Sunak pledges support for Tinubu's administration. You can find that story too inside the paper. And we have government justifies Nnamdi Kanu's repatriation from Kenya. And then we have mixed reaction, trade subsidy removal shift. You can read more detail of that on the front page and more inside the paper. And the big story here say why Tinubu flawed Atiku Obi by President Buhari. You want to know what he have to say about that? You can read more of that story. Inside also we have 10 burned in Plateau tanker accident. Judgment reserved in OAU murder case. You can find more of that too. We have the picture story where we can see the president-elect, his running mate, and together with a monarch. You can do well to get the nation and read more detail of that story.
On the Guardian newspaper, after $800 million palliative, federal government suspends subsidy, cites wrong timing, and the details can be found on page 8. And on APC crisis, Lukman drags Adamu to court over alleged breach of party constitution. Malamil Knox rep says claims of illegal $2.4 billion oil sale false. The details can be found on page 23. The big story, Nigeria's drug crisis hits 500 billion naira worth of seizure yearly. You can find the details inside the paper on page 4 and 5. And we have a chart where we can see Nigeria's drug crisis, and you can get the paper and find the details more. And Celia, I'd like to say, if we're having a seizure, or I don't know the word, let me not chew my word, but if we have the NDLEA trying this hard to make sure that drugs are not out there, and we are recording 500 billion like worth of what they've been able to get back from people, then they've been doing a good job so far. We see them on our roads, we see them on our streets, and I believe that this is what has been happening in other parts of the state. We've seen situations also in Lagos where so many drug barons were busted, so many warehouses, so many people at the airport. We have recorded a lot of cases of these drugs being gotten back and making sure they don't go out. Now, it doesn't affect the fact that we still have a lot of it out there, because we are having cases of drug abuse. We are having people becoming addicted to these things every day. We have a lot of drug cases even on our streets every single day. But this is a record that we would just like to say, let them keep up doing the good work, and we hope that we will see more results. We will see a better report and a better increase, because I want to believe that this is a problem. This is a crime that can be solved, and we can't sleep on it, because the more you're out there working, the more these criminals are out there finding more intelligent ways, let me put it like that, of actually bringing these drugs inside. But as they are upgrading in their own criminal minds, I want to believe that you as a fighter should also keep increasing in the ways of getting them also. And I want to believe that we will see more of these positive reports on our papers, and we will have a record years to come that this was the level of drug crimes in the country. However, it has come down drastically to a level that it is manageable, that we can even say we are not having this as a major problem in Nigeria.
You know, Richard, this story is very dear to my heart, and that's why I just couldn't wait for you, know, so we could talk about this story. Yeah. Of course, NDLA are trying their best, and we can see just from the chart, I think this is a chart that everybody should be concerned about. Let's know the number of arrests. We've seen people who have become addicted to, just like you're saying, and then we keep saying the rehab is very expensive, of course, so very few people actually can afford to get their wards to, or take their loved ones to the rehab. But that notwithstanding, we really need to talk, and we really need to make the noise louder, because I'm concerned, because I remember there was a time on my way home, and yeah, they were by the roadside, and then we're actually asked to park by the way so they could check our bags. It might look embarrassing, but they were doing their job. And I was happy, because this is a time where we see you see promising youth on the street. I think just 2 weeks back, I met a young guy, very sharp, Rachel, very intelligent. You needed to listen to the, the poem he was actually making, very fluent English, but something was not right. This guy is already addicted, and then it is obvious that his parents cannot afford to take him to the rehab, because from the way he is, it comes and goes. So that means there is hope for him that if he doesn't get that bad, he can actually get back. But then how many parents can afford it? And then I was happy that this would go on, but then after that, I did not see any on that same spot again. Yes, I know that maybe we're talking about we don't have a lot of capable hands to run everywhere. Let's just take Plateau State as a case study, for instance. There are a lot of all these rocks and hills. You need to go there, Richard. You will know that a lot of things are happening. And I just hope that the NDA, they will work together with, the local vigilantes. And then I just hope that they get rewarded, because we saw when we had these terrorists, and then I think a sum of 5 million or 500,000 was being promised. Something of that nature can also be done, because just look at the money, Rachel. We're talking about 500 million naira. What?
Yes.
So imagine how much parents spend for rehab. Imagine how much we've seen so many times, barons, some buildings and all of that. And most of the time when you check, they don't work alone. They always work with a higher power.
Of course.
So when we want to deal with it, we have to start from the root cause. How does this thing get here? I know, just like you say, they look for smart ways. Some swallow it, some we've had in baby diapers, old women. So many creative ways,
So many.
That is what they call creative. But that's not being creative enough, because somebody's life is at stake. I'm going to look at some of the cough syrup we have that have been abused several times. So I think in as much as we are applauding them, but they need to try more. They need to intensify more effort, because truly a lot is happening. We have a lot of youths right now, very promising youths that this have taken their lives. And I hope that the government will do something. NGOs can also come together. Individuals can also come together. Let us put our hands together and really, really do something
everybody's responsibility.
About this.
Yes. And the last story on the Guardian newspaper, on Sudan crisis, confusion, logistic hurdles trail evacuation. The detail can be found on page 3, and that's all the news on the Guardian newspaper.
All right, before we move further, we've said a lot, so we'd just like to take a break at this moment to open the phone lines. Let us hear what your views are. What do you think about the back and forth federal government actually having concerning removing of the fuel subsidy after $800 million has been given to Nigeria from the World Bank for palliative? We also have the fact that we've seen the number of, billions of dollars that has been spent, especially in regards to drugs, and also how it comes in. We have the cases of those in rehabilitation, persecution, a lot of things are happening in the country. So when we come back from the break, we'll open the phone lines. Do not go anywhere, stay tuned. Thank you for staying tuned. It's still the Dailies, your winning station, where we keep you up to date with what is happening from our Nigerian newspaper. Before on the break, we were giving you some of the headlines of what we've been looking at on the papers this morning. We've seen the fact that some Nigerians are still stranded in Sudan. We've also had the issue of some that are stranded in the desert because of 1 or 2 issues. We've also seen that the NEC, talking about the meeting they had, are actually contemplating whether to remove the fuel subsidy in June or not. But then before that will be done, they need to consult with other stakeholders and see how this will be. We've also seen on the papers about the money, about 500 billion naira that has been spent on drug crisis in Nigeria. These and many other stories, what we have been looking. I still have Rachel with me in the studio. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, at this moment, we'll open the phone lines. Their numbers are displayed on your screen. Please do well to call us of any story or that is of interest to you. And do remember to actually turn down the volume of your TV set so we can hear you clearly in the studio, and also to be very civil with your language. Please, no use of abusive words whatsoever, no matter how emotional you get. And we'll continue reading some of the stories on the paper, and I will go with the Punch newspaper. The big story on the Punch says National Assembly leadership. Tinubu governors dump consensus for zoning, with the rider governors advise Tinubu against endorsing candidate and seek due process. Work with party leadership for principal officer selection, Tinubu tells governors. And let me read a little detail of that story. It was gathered that the meeting was part of Tinubu's consultation with the APC stakeholders. All right, let me start from the very first page, where we saw that he had earlier met with the party National Working Committee members and some aspirants. The governors were led to the meeting by the chairman of the PGF, who also doubles as the governor of Kebbi State, Atiku Bangudu. Those in attended included the Vice President-elect Kashim Shettima, Governor Simon Lalong of Plateau State, Nasiru El-Rufai of Kaduna, Aminu Bello Masiri of Katsina, Hope Uzodinma of Imo State, Abubakar Baduro of Jigawa, Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos, Ben Ayade of Cross River, and then we also have Dabo Abiodun of Ogun, we have Biodun Oyebaji of Ekiti, and we also have other governors that were there during the meeting. And so there's this back and forth concerning how they will do the election on who will be the Senate president. So whatever the issue is, we'll keep you up to date. You can read more detail of that story on page 2. Federal government plans supplementary budget as next suspend subsidy removal. You can find that on page 29. Rescue Nigerian student arrive Egypt await airlift. You can find that on page 7 as well. PDP Labour Party lost the poll to overconfidence coming from Buhari. And we have over 60,000 soldiers recruited under my watch. This is coming from President Buhari. $2.4 billion diversion claim baseless coming from Malami. Nigerian rejoice as police go after rugged cops. You can find that on page 3. And on flood 16 state federal government relief fund, you can find that too on page 34. We have picture story here where we can see the president. We can also see the former president. We can see Yakubu Gowon, the former head of state. This was during the correlation yesterday in Abuja. You can do well to grab the Punch and read more detail of that story.
On the Daily Times newspaper, next suspends fuel subsidy removal, next regime to decide on deadline. The big story, over 3 million Nigerians still trapped in Sudan. First batch of evacuees returned today. APC's vice chairman drags Adamu to court. And we have Malami dismisses alleged disappearance of 48 million barrels of oil. And on the 10th National Assembly, APC NWC bows to pressure, dump zoning arrangement, says zoning may destabilize ruling party. At the downside of the paper, we have life and times of renowned historian Obora Ikimi. The details can be found on page 24. And we have a picture story where we can see the President, El-Rufai, and all the stakeholders, Governor Lalong of Plateau State, and others. And that's all the news on the Daily Times newspaper.
You know, Rachel, before we go further, I wanted to skip the story, but I think it's important we talk about it because it was a big story for the Punch, and then it's also on the Daily Times. And I wonder why the APC is actually planning to dump the zoning. It's important at the time. Nigeria is very fragile as it is right now, Rachel. And we are not going to rule out the fact that the present president-elect is actually coming from a particular zone.
Yes.
The running that is his vice is also coming from a particular part of you know, let's say from the north, and then the president is from the west. Now it's important at a time like this that everybody is represented properly when it comes to governance and in politics. And of course, we saw the papers where the likes of Kalu were actually saying that he should be, because he's an Igbo, so he's actually coming from the south or southeast, so they should also be represented. But I wonder what this will be, because this was the same issue we had during the presidential election. Before the primaries, where at a point in time it was as if there was going to be consensus, and then they now dumped the zoning, not just in the APC but even the PDP. And I clearly remember when the, especially the Igbos said that they thought that the Biafra war is over, but it's obvious it's not over. This is not to spike any fire anywhere. But I think that at a point like this in Nigeria, everybody should be rightly represented. And I'm begging the indulgence of the APC that even as they go about all of this thing, there are certain key issues that should be put on the table for everybody to be represented. We're having the president coming from this part. It is only right, because we saw in the paper where they said those from the north should step down. But of course, we saw in the papers over time that the northerners were still interested also. So I'm just hoping that even though we've seen these governors, which I mentioned that were there, I just hope that while going about all of this thing, that they will consider the right people, capable hands, which is important, of course. But then we should also look at, because in as much as we are saying Nigeria is a secular country, we are not going to rule out the fact that religion has always played a very vital role, whatever we do. So I hope that the right person that would be actually emerge at the end of the day, that whatever it will be done should be done properly at the end of the day.
So like the last thing you said, we would only lie to ourselves if we say we are not a religious country, because we clearly are. If we were in them, we wouldn't even have an issue of the Muslim ticket or a Muslim Christian ticket. If we were in things like this, would never be an issue in the first place. But for the fact that it keeps being an issue regardless at whatever level, then we know that we are religious. And secondly, I believe that the APC are going for the zoning for so many reasons that will not sit well with Nigerians at the end of the day. And I think that there is no way that you would take out zoning and give a fair result at the end of the day. Whatever your final decision will be very biased if you neglect the position and the importance of zoning in something very crucial and important like this. It's not about good governance only, but about Nigerians being well represented. The country is not just for a specific group of people. The country doesn't just belong to one side of people. It belongs to everybody, and it's not just an optional thing, but it is mandatory that everybody is well represented. Now, the moment you neglect that aspect, there is nothing fair about the final decision you would take. It's just going to be from one biased decision to another biased decision that we would have no option but to live with it and to just accept it, because it will not sit well with us, but we will be in a position of what can we do about it than to let it go or let it be. So if the APC truly want good governance, then they shouldn't neglect zoning and say for good governance, that's why they're not going for zoning. No, for good governance, zoning should be seen as a priority and should be considered that every Nigerian, every region, our geopolitical regions should be well represented in the coming administration, that no part of the country will be left aside, because I believe that whoever is in that key position will have the mind of his people, and if we are distributed well in every key position, then everybody stands a chance to benefit from this administration, because they have a representative there for them who would bring down whatever is expected down to their level and all of that. So yes, for good governance, I believe that the APC should consider zoning. Anything that wouldn't consider that would be biased, regardless of how beautiful they try to make it look.
They have already bowed to the pressure, so they have done the zoning. But then we just hope that they will do the right thing.
Yes.
Well, let's take a look at this day newspaper. NEC pushes federal government to suspend planned fuel subsidy removal, with a rider proposes supplementary budget amendment to PIA. NACCIMA petrol subsidy removal without operation of local refineries will hurt businesses and shut down small and medium enterprises. And we have Maleme dismisses claims of loss of $2.4 billion from crude oil sale to China, which you can find on page 8. Tinubu to APC governors work with party to elect the 10th National Assembly principal officers. And we have coming from Buhari, overconfidence, bad tactical moves kill opposition at polls. Says APC blended confidence with caution, work hard to win. Hint at retirement plans to live in Kaduna after 6 months in Daura. You can read more of that too. Discloses nation's military ranking has risen from 7th to 4th in Africa. We can find more of that in page 5. And on Sudan, first batch of Nigerian evacuees arrive country today. And we have the picture story where we can see all soldiers marching on, where we have the picture of the president, and that's all on this day newspaper.
On Vanguard newspaper, oil prices drop below $80 per barrel as OPEC others end meeting. The details can be found on page 19. Buhari's government shouldn't be blamed for not bringing back all Chibok girls. This is coming from the presidency. Nigerian students trapped in desert. This is still on the Sudan crisis, and we have talked and hope about how the federal government will do something quick about that. The big story on Vanguard, restore local refining, says NLC as federal government halts subsidy removal. Timing should not be now, coming from the finance minister. It is commendable, coming from the TUC. Leave petrol subsidy removal for incoming government, coming from CPPE. Federal government files 9 fresh grounds opposing Nnamdi Kanu's release. Supreme Court states May 11 for definite hearing. No condition permanent, Ohaneze tells Buhari and the federal government. The details can be found on page 11. We have a column on page 17 for Awe Lakemfa, and we have Utako Wan Pesero's job. The details can be found on page 38 for our sports lover, and that's all the news on the Vanguard newspaper.
Let's take a look at the Nature newspaper, where we have tomato farmers lose 1.5 billion naira to disease, and ABG blames climate change. Of course, we know that once it's raining, it has a way of actually affecting some of those perishable goods, yes, especially tomatoes. So no wonder when it's actually raining, tomatoes is very expensive and it easily gets spoiled. So we can see that, of course, the weather has affected that. So for our tomato farmers, it's very important that you get the Nature newspaper. I read more detail of that story on the front page and also on page 3, and how to protect your tomato farm. You have to look for expertise to actually help you in all of that. Still on Nature news, we have Owando champions energy transition in transportation, takes delivery of electric buses, which you can find on page 3. You can see picture of the electric mass transit buses, and they look quite nice. I hope that we'll be able to have more of this in the country. African Development Bank lists Nigeria and others among most vulnerable to climate risks. You can find more of that on page 6, and it's important that everybody read this so we can protect ourselves. We've seen flooding already in Lagos and other part of the country, so it's important for everybody to read that. Federal government stakeholders push for rubber sector revitalization, which I think is important. We begin to go to non-oil producing, sectors, and the likes of rubber is involved too. And on Nature Care, wonderful whole grains. You want to know what that is about? Read more of that on page 15. Federal government extend deadline for first subsidy removal. Ipman hails the action. You can find more of that on the front page and also on page 5. Maritime industry large enough to engage youths, coming from Namasa. You can find that too on the front page and also on page 5. And that's all on the Nature news.
On Punch Sport Extra, Ashola stars as Barca reach Women Champions League final. Emery best coach of this era, says Olise. Moses returned to Spartak training. Liverpool out of top 4 race. This is coming from Club. Lampard hits at about changes, and then you can find the details inside the paper on page 5. Ifinoan Ekpo exclusive. Playing for the Falcons at the highest level like I did back then was the greatest moment of my career. As a team, we gave our best each time we were on the pitch. My best moment with Super Falcons, you can find the details inside the paper. We have United handed Oshime transfer boost. The details can be found on page 7. We have EPL destiny in our hands, a statement coming from Pep. Arteta not giving up on the title. We can see the Premier League table, and then the Tottenham and Man United match ended up in a draw. And we have at the downside of the paper, United not desperate to sign Kane, and you can find the details on page 5. And that's all the news on Punch Sport Extra.
All right, let's take a look at the world of business on Business Day newspaper. Tinubu faces National Assembly leadership challenge. Mom on Atiku dual citizenship petition. You can start reading that on the front page and more on page 30. Olumelo Otetola investment re-echo power sector potential. You can find that on page 2. Tech operators outline ways to head off Tech operators outline ways to head off cyber attacks. You can find that on page 30. NEC advises federal government against first subsidy removal in June. And we have Nigeria didn't lost $2.4 billion from oil export to China, still coming from Madami. And then we have the channel management contract, which you can find on page 24. The big story, how political consciousness redefines artist popularity, where we have fast the rise of a protest musician. And you can actually read more detail of that story on page 31, and that's all on the Business Day newspaper.
On New National Star, Senate Presidency, Tinubu rejects APC NWC's concession candidates plan. You can find the details on page 24. From the Supreme Court, Nnamdi Kanu to no fate next month. With dual citizenship, Tinubu can't be president, Atiku tells court. The big story, federal government suspends fuel subsidy removal in major policy somersault. Wants incoming administration to take decision, seeks more negotiation with NLC and other stakeholders. Admits hardship, Buhari's 8th play game with nation's $2.4 billion oil money. The writer following that asked Finance Minister AGF to account for missing national assets. This is coming from Malami. Reps committee in limbo as government officials blame each other. The details can be found on page 2. 5 million Nigerians trapped as first set of evacuees arrived today. Government officials own 90% of shops in Garki Market. This is coming from traders. The details can be found on page 15. And overconfidence, complacency cost you 2023 elections, Buhari tells opposition parties. The details can be found on page 23. And that's all the news on New National Star.
Well, I hope we have a clear figure. I think the Daily Times said over 3 million Nigerians.
Yes.
Here we're having 5 million.
5
I hope
million.
we have the right statistics coming from the papers. Let's take a look at the Nigerian News Direct newspaper. Expert call for tighter supervision as bank failure spreads. You can find that on page 14. And on rape project, U.S. consultate merely a weakness to memorandum of understanding coming from the NDDC. Federal government bows to Labour, suspend fuel subsidy removal. And the big story on the 10th National Assembly leadership. Unite, walk in line with party position, Tinubu tell APC governors. And also we have on presidential election, overconfidence, bad tactics, shattered opposition despite foreign support coming from Buhari. And we also have NCDMB present exciting opportunity for sponsors, exhibitors, delegates at the NOGOF 2023. We have a column for Femi Adesina, which you can read on the back page, and we have picture stories still showing that of Tony Olume, and we also have that of Governor Sanwo-Olu. You can do well to get the Nigerian News Direct and read detail of the story that's of interest to you.
On the Matrix newspaper, NNPC Norwegian firms sign memorandum of understanding to build floating gas. The details can be found on page 12. Lampard defends fuming Chelsea fans after latest defeat. The details can be found on page 17. Why Atiku Obi lost presidential election, a statement coming from the president. And you can start with the details on the front page and continue inside the paper. And that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel, for doing this with me. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you to all you've done. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your support, and also thank you for always being there for us. Thank you to the crew members. Thank you to the general manager, the Eco executive, and everyone. Until we come your way again, do have a blessed weekend ahead.